Hello, everyone. I'm Gabriel Scherer, the fellow on the right. I'm going to talk about work that was done jointly with Olivier Martineau, my PhD student, the fellow on the left. This work is about frozen inference constraints for type-directed disambiguation. Type-directed disambiguation is used in many programming languages to decide the specific meaning of a name, usually the binding site of this name, based on type information that it chooses a site. And in general, an interesting question is how to combine this with type inference, guessing the type. If there is no type inference, it's very easy to have types at hand for disambiguation. And one excellent solution to this problem is type classes, or rather the inference mechanism that type classes rely on, which are qualified types, which provides very nice type inference through constraint abstraction. So in particular, they support ML-style generalization and provide an excellent approach for operator overloading. But there are some features of the language for which qualified types are not the right approach for disambiguation. One important such feature is the disambiguation of data constructors. So here is an example of a program, two different small programs with a data constructor K, used either as an expression or in a pattern. And many programming languages support the fact that you may define algebraic data types, several of them that have some names of constructors in common, and therefore type information is necessary to decide which of the K, of the constructor K, you mean. In this case, we do not want to abstract over the choice of K. So if you use qualified types and you had some function that is where it's not the inference of the function code itself does not tell you which K to use, you will get a type that is abstracted over any possible choice of K, and then the user of the function, the caller at each call site, will be able to instantiate it with a different choice of K. But this implies a compilation model where either you do a lot of compile time specialization or you have to pass a dictionary of constructors at runtime, and we do not wish for this. What we want is that an occurrence of a constructor in the code at a static place in the code is disambiguated into one specific constructor at a specific time. Okay. A worse problem than that is that the type of K may not be expressible as a class argument, as a function argument when you want to abstract over it. Maybe K is a constructor for a GADT, so it can have existential type parameters, and your type system does not allow arguments to start with first-class existentials. For example, in general, data constructors tend to have typing introduction rules that can be stronger than arbitrary term-level functions. And then the final problem, which is the most problematic of all three, is that with type classes, with qualified types, the idea is that you basically have the same typing rule for all the instances of the overloaded name. Well, not for example, if you have a plus operator in the type class, you expect it to have type A to A to A for the type A of your class. So it's not exactly the same type, but you have a schema A to A to A that is used to generate all possible types for this plus in a simple way. Whereas here, when we want to disambiguate over a type constructor, well, two different constructors named K in different data types may have vastly different typing rules, and there is no schema that can let you abstract over them. So again, you cannot use qualified types. And so the talk is about other ways to solve this problem. So one way to think about why qualified types are not right here is to think in terms of the layering between type inference information and disambiguation. With type classes, what you do is that first you do the inference without making basically any disambiguation guess, and then so you have enough information from just the name and the class declarations to have the generic type or template for the type of this operator, And then after inference, you can do type class resolution from type information, and you decide the disambiguation. But for constructor disambiguation, you need to interleave the two more closely. You need the program types to disambiguate the constructor K, but you also need the type of K to infer the program types around the use of K. So you need a more interleaved mechanism. The Hindley-Miller type inference, so used in ML family languages, typically propagates type information by unification, which is a rather powerful technique. Okay, but then to implement type-directed disambiguation, a more common approach is to restrict it a bit and to use bidirectional type inference. So typically, use bidirectional type inference to propagate information coming from type annotations put in by the user. They will be propagated inwards inside the term. So the root of the term has a type annotation, and then you use bidirectional discipline to push the type annotation inside the constructors, inside the term, towards the subterm, so leafwards, towards the leaf of the tree. This is a robust propagation of type information, and then bidirectional type inference will also do some sort of lateral propagation. Typically, when you have a function application, you will want to propagate information from the inference of the function, more typically, to the checking of the argument. But this is a bit more fragile, this lateral propagation, because, well, actually, there is a choice of direction. You could also want to infer the argument and then use this information to have some partial knowledge about the type of the function, for example. And if the user needs, for the particular program they're writing, a direction of propagation that is not the one that was chosen arbitrarily left to right or right to left by the programming language designer, they are out of luck. Whereas unification has this nice non-directional property that it would work in both directions. So this work that I'm talking about is a work in progress, exploring a mechanism for type-based disambiguation using unification that we call frozen constraints. So let's go back to constraints-based type inference. So the idea is it's a more declarative presentation of typically ML-style type inference, where instead of taking the program and then iterating over it, keeping some, let's say, inference information around, and at the end, voila, you provide the infer type. What you do is you split this in two steps. You take the program, it's an implicitly typed program T without most of the type annotations are not present, are not written by the user. And then from it, you generate a constraint C in some constraint language whose unknowns, whose variables, so you can think of it as a system of equation, and the unknowns are types. So more precisely, you have inference variables that will be solved into types. And then the constraint itself that if you solve it, then you can read from the solution a way to annotate your original type T into an explicit type T prime, which is like the same as T with more type annotation. All the type annotations have been solved. And the nice thing with that is that with this decoupling, well, the generator is easy to read and gives you the gist of the type system for your language. And then the solver can be more tricky to implement and has a lot of freedom in terms of traversal strategies and so on, more so than if you were implementing it as a one-pass transform. For example, if you have the function application TU, here is how to generate a constraint for it, so the generator part, with return type variable alpha. That means that I want to generate a constraint such that if I solve this constraint, then the type of TU, the output type of the return type of the function, will be assigned to the type variable alpha. How do I do this? Well, first, it's an existential constraint. So I say there exists a variable beta t and a constraint variable gamma u, such that beta t is a function type gamma u arrow alpha. So the argument type is gamma u and the return type is alpha. And t is well typed and its type is beta t, and u is well typed and its type is gamma u. So when I mean u is well typed, I mean the constraint that you generate from T. So if you solve this constraint, then you will get a solution such that you have a valid application of the function application typing rule whose return type is alpha. So frozen constraints are a new form of constraints that we propose, a new combinator of constraints in this type. So they are of the form angle bracket alpha f, where alpha is a type influence variable, and f is a meta-level function from partial types, that is, types that start with a head type constructor, but whose leaves may be partial types or type inference variables, so morally parts that are still unknown. And so it's a function from partial types to constraints, okay? And the idea, the intuition for the meaning of this frozen constraint alpha f is that the constraint will wait on the type unification variable alpha to become partially known. So when it becomes partially defined as a partial type tau, then we pass tau as an argument to the function f. We get a constraint f of tau, and we have to solve this constraint. So basically, it's a way to tell, I cannot tell you which constraint you must solve now, but let me know what's the type of alpha, the type inference for alpha, and then I will tell you what the constraint you have to solve. For example, here is how to generate a constraint for disambiguated use of a constructor in an expression in the non-GADD case, so no existential variables and so on, simple ML-style algebraic data types. So if you want to generate a constraint for kt, so t is the parameter of the constructor, with some return type alpha, you will create an existential variable beta t, ask that t will be well typed at type beta t, and then you create a frozen constraint that waits for alpha, the return type of t, to be determined. And once it is determined to be some partial type tau, you ask that beta t be equal to the argument type of the constructor k at the type tau. So the idea is that at this point you know which of the different types k belongs to, and so you can compute the argument type of k and get the precise mapping. So this is how we are expressing the disambiguation question. So this is a very principled approach. We are not guessing anything. We are waiting for the information to be available, and if the information never becomes available, we fail with a type error. So it's principled. We are not making any guess. We get a general solution, and it deals with type disambiguation. And so you can generate a constraint for constructor disambiguation, but a priori, the mechanism of frozen constraint is a bit more general and could be used for other variants of this language feature. So its principle is also very restrictive. So maybe as a language designer, you want to have some more flexible typing rules. For example, maybe you want to say, well, I can look at the typing environment. If there is a single declaration of the constructor k in scope, then I don't need to wait for some external type information. Right away, I know that this is the k I mean. And so then what you do is you change the constraint generator to implement this logic to inspect the typing environment, and in this case, where there is a single k, generate a different constraint. Okay, so it's not necessarily the only way to disambiguate data constructors, but it's a combinator that can be used as part of the solution to wait on disambiguation information in a very principled way. Okay, so this is nice. We wrote some prototypes, we played with examples. It works better in a sense that bidirectional type inference for disambiguation, in the sense that it can propagate more information in places where a bidirectional discipline would possibly not go in the direction you would expect. But we found that it's also a difficult feature. It's difficult to combine with generalization. I will talk about it, and also it's a bit difficult in theory. So let me talk about these difficulties. So the first question is, okay, I said that if at the end a frozen constraint remains unfold, then type inference fails with type error. But what do I mean by the end? When is the end? Of course, at the end of type checking the whole program, well, we are at the end, and if some frozen constraint remain, there is an error. But in Hindley-Milner style type inference, there is another notion of more local notion of end, which is when you reach a generalization point. So in particular, the let bindings Okay, what you do is you first insert the type of the definition of the binding, and then you perform generalization, which is to say, okay, what are the variables that are local to this type, and I will turn them into polymorphic variables. And in a sense, this ends the type checking of this part of the program. So there is the question of, for example, if a frozen constraint was introduced during the type checking of this let's definition, what should I do? Should I fail if it's not resolved yet at generalization point? So yes, what is generalization? The idea of generalization is to look at what type variables are still local to this part of the constraint and can be generalized, turned into for all quantified polymorphic variables. And then any user of this let definition will be able to instantiate these variables with their own choice at the usage site, and which inference variables are global in the sense that they are used by some other parts of the program, and so they cannot be generalized. Okay, so this is a very common operation during type inference. So in Haskell, GHT stopped generalizing local let definitions by default in absence of a type annotation, but still all the top level bindings are generalized, and there are many of them. And in ML style languages, there are a lot of generalization points. In presence of frozen variables, you have to change the generalization behavior a bit. You have to perform what I call frozen generalization. The problem is that when you look at the type tau and you ask, okay, what are the variables of tau that I can generalize? Well, some variable beta could be blocked by the frozen constraint. What does that mean? It means that it is used. So there is a frozen constraint that is not solved yet. So the alpha that is blocking the constraint is not known. And then the function f that may generate a constraint mentioning beta. Okay. So before you solve this constraint, before you find out what the value of alpha is, and then you go working on the constraint generated by f, you don't know, for example, if beta will eventually be inferred to be a local variable or a global variable. So at this point, you don't know how to solve your frozen variable, and because of that, beta, which is blocked by this frozen constraint, is in an unknown state from the point of view of generalization. And so what you must do is to track these variables. So before, when you generalize, you end up with two categories of variables: the ones that are global, that are not generalized, and the ones that are local, that are turned into polymorphic variables. And now you have three classes: the global one, the local one, and the blocked or frozen ones that are in an unknown state. So when you generalize type into a type schema, polymorphic type schema, you must remember what is the list of the blocked variables of this type. When you instantiate a schema that has blocked variables, what you do is you say, well, it may end up being a polymorphic variable. So I will generate fresh instances of this blocked variable as if there were polymorphic variables. But I will track these instances and say, okay, this generic schema has a new instance, and the blocked variables were instantiated into these fresh copies. And finally, when beta gets unblocked later during type inference, so we found a value for the alpha that was blocking the frozen constraint, and then we found out what constraint f of tau we must solve, which may or may not mention beta, and then we solved it, and so we know what this constraint would wanted to teach us about the value of beta. Then we can continue generalization. So we go back to see this blocks scheme. We look at all the instances that have been instantiated, and for all of them, we update their instance of the blocked variable beta. Well, if beta turns out to be a generic local variable, then it's fine. So it should be handled as it was handled as a generic variable. And if beta was actually unified with a global variable, then you need to unify all of its blocked instances as with the same global variable. So you delay the generalization choice on beta and then you make it after the fact once you learn the value of beta. This is delicate to implement. It was hard for me to explain. It's delicate to implement, and especially difficult to implement if you work with a type inference engine that is trying to be efficient. So it has efficient algorithm for efficiency of generalization. It uses a complex data structure, union find, and so on. And possibly it's using imperative implementation of this algorithm. And then all of this is very tricky to do. We have a partial implementation. We can try various examples, but we do not have a complete implementation yet. And finally, there is a theoretical difficulty. So first, to explain what is the problem, let me talk about how to give semantics to these constraint-based type inference systems. So the way we give them a meaning is by introducing a solution relation or a satisfaction relation. V is a solution of the constraint C. So you have to define a grammar of solution V, and then to define this judgment. And once you have this judgment that is defined, that lets you give specifications to the various parts of your type inference engine. So you can give a specification of a constraint generator, for example. A constraint generator is good if for any program T, the constraint C generated from T is such that all its solutions, V, so the set of V that satisfies C, determine well-typed explicitly version of T. So if I take this V, I can use it to annotate T, and I do get an explicitly fully annotated program that is well-typed. Okay? So there may be many different solutions, but they are all correct. So this is soundness of the generator. You can also ask whether the constraint generated is principled in the sense that there exists a most general solution. And then once you have this solution, you can use this solution relation, satisfaction relation, to define what it means to be a good constraint solver. So there are several ways to define a constraint solver. On paper, if you want, you could do it as a big step function from constraints to solution, or as a small step process that will rewrite constraints into simpler and simpler constraints until you reach a normal form constraint that can be turned into a solution. But in any case, you want to prove something like the fact that the premises of the big step derivation or the small step rewrite preserve the set of solutions of the original constraint. So if you can prove that, you have a good constraint solver. And now here is an example of solution relation for the constraint combinators we have seen in this talk. So for unification, for example, V is a solution of the unification constraint tau equal tau prime if tau V, that is the type you get, the ground type you get from instantiating the type variables, the inference variables of tau with their solution in V, is equal as a type to tau prime V. Makes sense. And then an existential constraint alpha C, the solution would be a pair TV of where V is a solution of the constraint C if you replace alpha by the ground type T. So you can see that these are fairly simple specifications for these constraint combinators. I'm not talking about how to guess the solution. I'm only talking about how to check that a solution is valid. And so it gives you a very nice specification that you can easily trust. But then the question is, okay, how do you specify frozen constraints in this way? So the most obvious approach is to say that V is a solution of the frozen constraint alpha F if V is a solution of the constraint F of alpha V, that is applying the function F to the solution found for alpha in V. The problem with this specification is that it allows out of thin air behaviors. So for example, here I have the whole constraint I have is a frozen constraint on alpha. Okay, it's waiting on alpha. And then once you give me the value of alpha, tau, I will ignore this value and generate a constraint that forces alpha to be unified with int. Okay, and so this constraint is vicious because there is no way to know by solving the part of the constraint that is not frozen, which is the empty constraint, there is no way to find out what should be the value of alpha. But then once you make a guess, well, if you guess exactly the right value of alpha, which is int, it works. And if you make any other guess, it fails. So this constraint can be satisfied with this judgment by the solution that maps alpha to int, but it's not satisfying because, of course, our solver will not find this solution. It will never inspect the meta-level function f before having found from the rest of the constraint a partial solution for alpha. And also, it does not match the intuition of what we want frozen constraint to do, how we want them to behave. So we want a specification that is more precise and would rule out this out of thin air behavior. So we want to say that alpha v must be determined without looking inside f. Okay. So morally, one way to express this would be to say, okay, if I have a constraint C that contains a subconstraint frozen alpha f, then to be a valid solution of it, V, I ask that first V is actually a solution of C of f of alpha V, so as before, but also that C top, so replacing this frozen constraint by the trivial constraint top inside C, gives me a simpler constraint that determines alpha. So I want this simpler constraint to fix a value of alpha, such that, well, one way to state it would be to say that all the solution of this constraint, for example, give a value to alpha. I don't exactly know how to define this precisely. In fact, I don't think that this is the right way to make this precise, but this is the idea. Okay, it's a sort of local principality condition on not the whole solution or the whole type, but just alpha, which is sort of related to the way in which some work on type inference have to locally require that a part of the solution be principal to justify their inference choices. So this is not so nice. It feels a bit like a hack, and the question is, okay, is there a nice way to specify the semantics, the meaning of this frozen constraint without allowing you the out of thin air solution? What's a way to express this and to have a good match between the specification and the implementation? So to summarize, frozen constraints are an interesting, powerful, but difficult constraint combinator that we propose for type-based disambiguation, and this is all a work in progress. Thank you for your attention, and we would be happy to deal with questions or to get advice on how to solve in particular this second problem. Thank you.